So about a month ago, we made a whole tier list on all the best cards that MLB The Show, and yes, you guys seemed to enjoy that video, but it was also really long. So today, what we're going to go through is an updated tier list on each position in the game, talk about a more meta list, kind of streamline the list a little bit because talking about tens of cards seemed a little unnecessary and a little much. So we're going to try to limit all of these lists to players I suggest the most and just suggesting some players that are probably worth avoiding because there aren't many players that are really worth not even touching in this game. I have 4 different tiers of players at each position. I want to try to lead you all in the right direction of choosing players for your God Squad, choosing which players to go for, and overall building your team the right way. Let's get into it. Alright, so without taking any further delay, this is going to be a hefty video, so feel free to sit down, get comfortable, get a snack, and listen along to me talking about most of these players. I'll mostly be diving deep on our meta players, our best players in the game, and kind of dabbling in on some of the other solid options we have in the game. And other than that, I'm just going to suggest some good starter options if you are just getting the game for the first time wondering who you should be using, and just some players that are maybe worth avoiding because there's definitely a lot better options if you're playing the game enough and going for certain players and the best players to build your team. And at the end, I do have a God Squad build. This isn't the team I actually rock because I like to use fun players and mix it up a bit. But this God Squad team is probably the team you want to shoot for or try to build, or at least something similar. But let's talk about our catchers first. All right, so this is the catcher tier list. As you'll see at every position, there are a few players or one player that I have highlighted blue. Those are the players that I'm using and who I personally think are the best. There are a lot of great options, and a lot of these cards are kind of like 1A, 1B, 1C in terms of being the best. But for me personally, for my use, I had the most success with these players, so that's who I end up using. Also, I don't get to try everyone, so a lot of this is me judging based on attributes and judging based on the swing of a player that I may have used at some point earlier on in the year. Our 3 S tier catchers are the All-Star Game JT Realmuto, 98 monthly award Kyle Schwarber, and 97 Team Affinity 3 Salvador Perez. All these cards are great because they all have good enough defense. Realmuto and Salvi both have gold defense, but Realmuto is the best defensive option with a higher arm strength. Salvi takes a little bit of a hit defensively because he doesn't have as good arm strength, but also hits better, I find. He crushes lefties a lot more than Realmuto, and I love Salvi's swing. And Schwarber is super valuable because he's a lefty catcher bat. He crushes righties, which at this point, there are a good amount of righties in the game. And just in general, aren't any other lefty catcher options. Him having a secondary catcher is a big deal. He's not going to be a great defender by all means, but it'll be good enough. And for me, I personally still hit solid enough lefty-lefty with him for it to not be an issue. But you may want to consider having that 97 Salvi on your bench. So if you do face a lefty, you could just plop in Salvi. And now you have someone who has 125 contact, 125 power versus the lefty. But other than that, you know, our A tier guys, your other TA catchers like the TA, GT Realmuto, and that Mike Zunino, those cards are great catcher options. Zunino's contact for his raise is a little low. He does have the best defense though. And that Realmuto's defense is weirdly not good enough for me to really suggest. Usually a Realmuto card has better defense, and this one doesn't have the most, but he does have the speed, but you're better off using the 98. Then 95 Salvi is a good buy on the market option. Good power versus both sides. The swing plays great, but again, the contact is a little lower. Also, older players like Jimmy Fox, Carlos Santana, they're very good catchers still. Very good options, but I just think those other guys are significantly better than these players at this point. And in terms of our starter budget options, if you're just hopping on for the game for the first time, if you barely have done much in the game, those are the best options I would suggest to you, just because they're quickly to obtain. Now, that Campusano was super cheap for the event. Adley Rutschman, the super cheap market buy. Yerman Mercedes and Keibert Ruiz are very easy to earn through top sound moments, very viable options. And a Tyler Stevenson is a good card just because he's free to earn a monthly program and a very viable option because the splits are a little weak. Cards I would avoid. Guys like Sam Huff and Mike Piazza. They do have solid hitting attributes, but their swings are very long for some reason. If you're on Hall of Famer Legend, you may struggle with these swings some more just because they're very long. It's tough to time up a swing properly. You got to really be dialed up on any pitch. to really time it up properly. And a lot of people have talked about their struggles with Huff and Piazza. Guys at your tops now, guys like Kurt Casale, Yan Gomes, and then put them all there. The most tops now catcher options, you know, good like if you're just starting off the game maybe, but again, they're just better options. And those gold guys like Ruiz or Mercedes are at least really good hitters. The other catchers, not really the most balanced hitters, I find. And Travis d'Arnaud, I don't like to use a player like him because he's super split heavy. And that's just in general what you'll see. I don't like players with super dramatic splits. All right, let's go into our first baseman now. All right, so here are first baseman here. Like, there are a lot of really good, viable first basemen. It's more so of what your preference is, maybe the players you have at this point. If you're someone who hasn't touched any live series collections at all, you'll likely have more value buying a guy like Vlad Jr., Pete Alonso, or getting Eddie Murray free from the inning program than, you know, grinding all the way to get just David Ortiz. It's very much a lot of work. Ortiz is kind of like the go-to first base option if you have none of these other guys. He's very good still, but obviously not worth all the subs just do the AL collection for him. But a very good first base option still. Honestly, I think Vlad is the best first baseman in the game right now. He doesn't have the same splits versus lefties like Poppy does. But first of all, Vlad has reverse splits, so he's very good versus righties and lefties. I like his swing more. And the defense is actually a little better at first base. Not like it really matters because it's first. But like, he has silver fielding at first. So overall, I think it's a significant upgrade from that Poppy card. The Poppy definitely isn't bad. Honestly, I would love to use him some more still to get him super factor. But like, I'm just having a lot of fun with Vlad. Pete Alonso and Prince Fielder are virtually the same card attribute-wise. Except Prince is a lefty, Pete is a righty. And they both have solid swings. But again, if you're going to be getting all the home run derby guys, chances are you're going to want to get that Vlad over these two, but they're very good options as well. And that Eddie Murray is a great switch hitter option above 100 hitting attributes everywhere. He's honestly slept on at this point. And obviously our A tier guys, can't go wrong with a good Matt Olson card, but I heard his diamond defense doesn't play as good as it should. Also, it is first base, so you don't need diamond defense. It's not a necessity. I just feel like Olsen's contact is a little bit low for me to put him in that S tier. That Mancini is very similar to Alonso, except his contact versus righty is a little lower. So, you know, not as great as a split heavy option. Guys like Rizzo and Dunn are very cheap market options. Dunn is a little more power, but Rizzo is better all around. Scope is a great free to earn option through the monthly program, and Tommy is another free to earn TA option from TA2. Tommy's contact versus lefties is a little low for me to really suggest starting him at this point, but overall, you can't go wrong with any of those A tier guys. In our B tier, Miguel Sano, the tops now, is a very good starter option. Great power versus both sides. If you're on all-star and below, good option despite the low contact. I have Jared Walsh down there just because he's no more than the bench bat. Crushes righties, really good versus righties, but it's just like you face a lefty, that contact is way too low for me to really suggest him. Jose Abreu and Vlad are good monthly award options that are very cheap. I mean, very easy to earn. And then Willie Stargell is basically a junior version of Jim Thome. He doesn't have primary in the outfield though. And you're able to get him very quickly in TA too. So good options there. Obviously, if you cannot see the trend on the bottom, players you want to avoid at first are players without power. We don't need great defense. We want players who have good power, solid hitting attributes versus both sides, and guys like Olerud and Will Clark are especially higher contact type players. Not enough pop. That Lou Gehrig and Edgar Martinez card, he didn't get shown enough love with the power on each side. And, you know, Don Mattingly is not a good first base option, more so a solid option for third base or maybe the corner outfield, but you don't want to play him at first just because you can get bigger power. Let's go into our middle infielders now. All right, so these are our middle infielders, and I want to point out with our middle infield options here, I did lump them together, and the only reason I lumped them together is because a lot of shortstops, if you don't want to play them at short, you can play them at their secondary second base. So most of these guys you could flip-flop, and I would suggest choosing potentially two of your better options. Maybe one's locked in as a second base option only, maybe one is only a shortstop, but overall, just I lumped them together because you mostly flip-flop them. And, you know, a lot of these players, I would suggest, even though they have primaries at short, may be better off as second baseman. Obviously, Jackie, Soriano are still S-tier second base options. They're very good, I love Soriano. He's got a slower swing, but more power. Jackie is good if you don't like Soriano. He's got higher contact and a little bit quicker of a swing. Both of them are very similar to me. Some people like Jackie more, some people like Soriano more. I've enjoyed Soriano more. At shortstop, though, there are a lot of great options at short right now. You have Wander Franco, who I think is the best all-around shortstop. Good defense, speed, and good all-around hitting attributes, and he is a switch hitter. And anytime I've played him so far, he's hit some frozen ropes against me. He looks good. I haven't actually used this 99, though. I enjoyed the other 99 a lot, though, so I'm excited to use him now. But now we have other options like Trey Turner, who has one of the best hitting attributes out of all the shortstops, I would say. But the defense is a risk, so you're probably better off playing him at second base or as secondary center field. Xander Bogaerts is a very great option at shortstop, a very cheap option on the market too. I think he's still going to be less than 50K for a while, even though he's the base here at Home Run Derby pack. Good enough power. There's not much speed if you're someone who likes that. Semien is like Bogaerts, except a little lower contact and I think a little higher power. Correa is very similar to Semien attribute-wise, except Correa is the primary at short and he's a little slower than Semien. If you like one Trevor Story, you're going to like the other very likely. The second Trevor Story, the Home Run Derby one, is likely a better off-bench option just because he does have lower contact versus righties, but I think the power will play at shortstop, especially if you're all-star and below. That contact shouldn't be much of an issue. I put him in that tier just because no one really has that level of power at a primary shortstop with gold fielding. But the 96 Trevor Story is a better all-around option. A little lower power, but is likely a very comparable shortstop to say that Xander Bogaerts or Carlos Correa. Our A tier guys, I think Jake Cronenworth, Ozzie Albies are very solid team affinity options. I've been using Ozzie, and he's very nice for a switch hitter bat. Just the attributes versus righties are a little low. That Chris Taylor, I think, is super underrated. He's got a center field primary, but he's got the secondary in the middle infield. I think he's a great starter shortstop until you get one of the S tier guys. Crushes lefties, pretty good versus righties. Honestly, I might use him over that Ozzie Albies just because he's better versus both sides, and he still has gold fielding in his secondaries. Ryan Sandberg has that Trevor Story-like power. I feel like the contact versus righties, I believe, is a little too low. I'm just not the biggest fan of Rhino's swing. Some people who do like a good old Ryan Sandberg card will like this though, and he could play up to that S tier. I think guys like Poisson and Brian Roberts are glitchy options. Ernie, Groshans, and Mauricio are good enough shortstops for the time being still, but you want to upgrade to those S tier guys for sure, I would say. Tatis is one of the best live series cards in the game. He's kind of like Mike Trout where he still has that use, but I think the S tier guys outclass Tatis just because of the splits he has. And that Jonathan Scope is a great second base option because that secondary. Big bat, not good defense though, so keep that in mind if you're going to use him. Guys like Adam Frazier, I think, has a little low power versus lefties or righties. I forgot which side it was. Can't suggest him too much. Kevin Biggio is a nice starter second baseman if he's cheap enough on the market. Good versus righties, not so versus lefties. Same with that Brandon Crawford, Nick Solak. Good beginner shortstop cards if you did your monthlies. D. Gordon is good if you did the Marlins collection. Very glitchy card. And Nico Goodrum if you happen to have him. If you took a break from TA2 and TA3 and you're back on the game, that Goodrum is very solid still. And overall, same kind of trend. What kind of shortstops in second base do you want to avoid? Most of your tops now, guys, aren't really good enough attribute-wise. Guys like Bill Mazeroski doesn't have that great hitting attributes overall. And Bryce Terang has contact and defense. Not much power, though. And we kind of want power, especially looking at those top shortstop options. There's power all around at the shortstop position as of right now. There are a lot of other shortstops I would say to avoid, like your Barry Larkins, your Craig Biggio at second base. There's not enough pop in those cards. At this point in the game, even in our B tier players are better power options. Power usually does play, or at least you get glitchy guys with speed like that D. Gordon. Now let's go to our third baseman. All right, so here are our third baseman. Obviously, Chipper Jones is still the best in the game. If I were to choose one third base option, I would still suggest Chipper. If you're close to getting live series collections done, definitely stick that out because Chipper is still really good and he is going to be one of, if not the best third baseman all year. Switch hitter, I don't think I've ever hit this well with the collection award. I'm hitting like 500 with him. But at this point, you don't have Chipper. You have great options. You have that 99 Vlad. He has the secondary at third. And he hasn't been too bad defensively. But again, Chipper's going to be a little better defensively. I've had less issues with Chipper than I deal with Vlad thus far. Also, Castellanos is a great third base option. He's like that Vlad, except worse defense, but he has more contact. So if you struggle with smaller PCIs, I would suggest Castellanos. And this could just be me, but this Eduardo Escobar card is extremely underrated. Really good power versus both sides, over 100 power versus both sides. Switch hitter. Almost call him a mini Chipper Jones, but except he is better versus both sides. He's not too crazy on one side as Chipper is. Very good starter third base option until you get, say, Chipper Jones at one point, or maybe buy Vlad on the market. Our A tier guys like Troy Gloss. I just don't think many people liked Gloss's swing and should have played a little better on the attribute card, but you know, I just don't think that he was as good as the attribute showed. But if you have him out there and you hit well with him, very great option at third. That Daily Moment Pablo Sandoval I think is a sick card. I just wish he had the catcher secondary. The splits versus lefties I think just aren't as good. He does have diamond defense, so if you like that defender type, he would be your go-to option. Kind of like that Troy Gloss, except Pablo's got the switch hitting. I don't know, man. I don't think he's going to be a super great third base option for a long while, especially if you did your TAs, Castellanos, and Escobar. I personally think are better. I don't think J-Ram and Devers are too bad TA cards, but I just feel like J-Ram doesn't excel in anything. I think Eduardo Escobar does have the good power versus both sides. But that J-Ram, he's got good power versus one side and good contact versus the other. So it's kind of like flip-flopped. He's like two different hitters on each side of the plate. I just feel like I want the power at third base whenever possible. Devers is a little platoon heavy too. Not great versus lefties. Longo and Seager are good, solid options. Like my best comparison is to say like that Rizzo card at first base, but as third base options. Good all-around third baseman that at this point you could buy for fairly cheap on the market. But I would want a bigger bat at third like Castellanos, Escobar, Vlad, or Chipper. Groshans and Mauricio, if you have them, if you want to play them at their secondaries, they'll be solid there. And that Jimmy Fox is alright versus lefties. But again, I think the S tier guys are personally better. If you're just hopping on the game for the first time, you can get that Tommy Edman in the inning program. Same with that Rafael Devers. That Todd Frazier could be an alright starter option that they came out with. Ryan McMahon, I think, is one of the best budget beast options in the game. If you hadn't played a game in a while and don't have many options, McMahon is sick. Vlad and Turner are good monthly award options from the first monthly award program. But, you know, at this point, I want better swings or just better well-rounded attributes at third. But, you know, if you're just hopping on a game for the first time or took a good break from it and hopping back on it, I would suggest those guys. Players I would avoid. Top sound cards, yet again, most of them I don't find too great. Guys like that Brock Holt that they came out with is just so contact heavy. Could maybe be useful as a bench guy for all the positions he has, but I just don't think that Brock Holt will be much on any sort of team. Joe Torre is a solid catcher option, but not a great third base option because, again, the power, or at least the lack thereof. That Isaac Paredes, again, lacks power. If you haven't seen a trend, I want power at third base. It's kind of like a second first base for me. There aren't that many positions where you get super good power and not have the defense be too much of an issue. So I want to make sure I use third base and first base for that kind of stuff. Now let's go to our outfielders. All right, so here are outfielders, obviously a little bit bigger of a list. Obviously, there are a lot of S-tier players. The thing I want to point out with our S-tier players, the first 4 or so players, I think are players that have the most long-term use. They're players that will be used or likely used for a long while just because they're very good all-around cards. They have great all-around hitting versus both sides, good power and contact. They have good enough defense. Their swings play well, or at least most people do solid enough with Soriano. But Soriano is one of those guys, he could be an issue for some. But overall, I think these have the most long-term use. Do most people have these guys? Maybe not. So you want to try to pick and choose at least one of these guys at some point if you were looking for a long-term outfielder. And yes, I think Larry Walker is still in that class despite the weak splits versus lefties. I think his swing will play well enough, and especially the damage he'll do versus righties, plus the diamond defense, 100% worth it. He will be a little bit cheaper as a World Series award at some point soon now, so at that cheaper price point, it will definitely be more so worth it. We have some bats all lumped together in the rest of this, though. We have guys like Kyle Schwarber, Castellanos, and David Justice all lumped together as really good bats, like potentially more power bats than those four to the left of them, but less so all-around players. Guys like Schwarber, he's more so a catcher option, but if you want to play him in the outfield, he does have like gold defense, I think. Castellanos is a bigger all-around bat, but worse defense. And Justice, I think, is a super underrated card. 100 plus hitting attributes everywhere. And Silver Fielding is a very good corner outfield bat. Guys like Jason Dominguez and Byron Buxton are very similar. They have better defense and speed. They're kind of locks for center field, I would at least say. Unless you have both of them on your team, then you want to throw them in the corner. But great defense, great speed. Go-to center field options if you don't have all those top four players. And then guys in your TA3 are also very good options. Mullins and Adolis Garcia, I like to lump together. Adolis has higher power, a little lower contact, but similar defense to Mullins. Mullins has the higher contact and a little lower power, but both their swings from my use have played well, and they both have their functionality as like a good center field option, or at least corner field option, where you can kind of stuff away that silver defense they have. And then guys like Aaron Judge, I think, are great options as well. He's got great power versus both sides. Definitely good enough contact. Diamond defense, so you put him in right field where you maybe don't have the Acuna yet. This Judge is a really good card, but just keep in mind, a bigger strike zone isn't everyone's favorite. But that defense does have that end game outfielder use for me. Now to our A tier guys. The kind of trend you'll see with these players is that many of them lack in some sort of attribute, or at least just are players that people have used for a while but have just become outclassed at this point. You very likely will have at least one of these options in your outfield if you haven't been playing as much, just because, you know, maybe not everyone has done their TA grinding yet and you're looking for good options to fill your outfield with. I would suggest one of these. Guys like Brian Reynolds, Ken Griffey Jr. are one of those all-around outfielder types, except Reynolds is a little worse defensively, but you're probably better off throwing him in the corner outfield. Griffey is a great center field option. I just felt like his contact is a little bit low. The swing will definitely carry that card. He's probably a borderline S tier option. I just wanted a little bit higher contact out of that Griffey card versus both sides. Guys like Stanton are really good bats versus lefties. The contact versus righty is a little low. Definitely a concern, not worth the price point, I would say, but I do well with every Stanton card. He's kind of like that big bat corner outfield option, like those home run derby cards like Shohei and Juan Soto, except he actually has better defense than Ohtani and Soto. Also, Soto and Ohtani are more better all-around hitters. Joey Gallo is actually the one good defender for the home run derby card. It's just the contact versus righties is a tad low. If you're a Hall of Fame or legend, you probably want to pass on him. But overall, a very viable outfielder for sure if you're on All-Star. That Yoenis Cespedes, honestly, is a little bit of an underrated card. He's like that corner outfielder type. Reminds me a lot of Stanton attribute-wise, but a little less power than Stanton, but a little higher contact versus that reverse side. Teoscar Hernandez just lacks power versus righties. Chris Taylor is a viable backup option to have as an outfielder. He's got gold fielding. Very underrated TA card, like I said before. Nelson Cruz has a good enough bat, but he kind of is just like a not as good Aaron Judge, I find. Judge has better defense, and I think he's very similar to that Judge card. Obviously, our starter outfielders we used for a while from the second inning program or TA2, or just from Live Series collections on our right side here are still okay options. So those players to the very right of the A tier are still viable options, cheaper options if you want to use them up until you get to that S tier. Our B tier guys, you know, like I said before, are just your very base. If you just hop on a game, you don't have many players to use, you can still do some damage with these players here. Some of your top standout cards like Juan Lagares is a solid all-around option. Mountcastle, you can maybe stuff at first base or in the corner outfield. Jock Peterson again play first base or corner outfield. Tommy Pham has the attributes to be good, but his swing doesn't play the best. But I actually didn't do too bad with it. And as you'll see, a lot of these guys in the B tier are kind of like a little outclassed attribute-wise. Like that Michael Brantley, there's not enough power or speed for me to really warrant him being in the corner outfield. He's slower, and just like the bat isn't good enough to be that big corner outfield bat. Guys like Soler and JD Martinez are basically just like you hop on a game and want power. Very good options for that. Are the only players I really suggest avoiding. Many of the top now cards are, you know, if you're gonna go get that process of getting them, you likely have other options that are better. That Austin Meadows, Ramon Laureano, a little split heavy. Laureano does have like better defense, so it's that kind of thing though. If you're gonna put an outfielder out there, you don't want dramatic splits, I would say. Just someone who can hit pretty solid versus both sides. Guys like that Martinez and Soler are just better because they do have good power versus both sides. It will be good enough versus lefties and righties. And overall, that is it. There are a lot of outfielders here. Feel free to take a screenshot or just take one last look. There aren't many wrong options in the outfield. You can likely find 3 outfielders that work the best for you. Right now, my best 3, I would say, are Soriano, Acuna, and Trout. But, you know, Larry Walker would be one I would try. Let's go to our pitchers now. All right, so here are starting pitchers. And as you'll see, like the outfielders, we have a ton of pitching options. And the thing with our S tier of pitchers is that there is a big range. Like, I think the S tier pitchers are the guys that you should make sure if you have them, you want to at least try and see how you do. Some guys I think are virtual locks in your rotation, while others are guys you may try that most people like that you may not do as well with yourself. Our A tier guys are players who either were good for a while and just don't have the attributes to keep up with that S tier, or players who do have the attributes to keep up with that S tier, just their stuff doesn't play as well. They're more likely your 4 or 5 starters in your rotation for the longer while than being like that ace level starter like those S tier. Our B tier are guys that if you're just hopping on the game, you don't have many players yet, you can get away with using them on the lower levels, I would say, but playing against a solid player, they will likely get rocked. And our F tier is just players that I would just completely avoid, that I don't know how to pitch effectively with. Going through the S tier, we have Ohtani, who is mostly valuable because he's a good enough pitcher. He is not going to be the most lights out starter in a game, that's for sure, but he's good enough to pitch effectively with, and the bat he brings is out of this world. No other pitcher is going to have the hitting attributes, so any sort of weakness he has in the mound, he'll definitely make up with the bat. DeGrom, I think, is the best pitcher in the game, attribute-wise and pitch mix-wise, as the outlier. Solid pitch mix. He's going to have nasty break in his card, and he kind of has like hitting attributes too. It's not Ohtani level, but you know, you can get away with hitting with him. Edward Cabrera, Al Leiter, I think are still very effective in this game. A lot of people still pitch effectively with that Leiter card. A little more expensive to pick up, but still not too expensive at this point. And Edward Cabrera's outlier sinker is still insane. Very, very good right now still. If you're on Hall of Fame or Legend difficulty, definitely worth stocking him in your rotation. And then after that, after those top 4 for me, it kind of opens up. You may have one pitcher in this bunch that you suck with, one that you're very good with. I wanted to list them because these are mostly the players I've seen people's rotations still, or at least had seen for a while. I didn't imagine them taking a big dip just over the last couple weeks. Guys like Lance Lynn, I think that Lance Lynn's very nice. He's got good control. He's got the sinker cutter fastball mix, but I didn't pitch too well with him. For some reason, I just felt like I couldn't get strikeouts. I couldn't pitch effectively with that 12-6 curve or changeup like he has. So I just don't know what his out pitch is. Like, if he had a slider, then this card would probably be really, really good. James Paxton's all right. It's just the sinker doesn't have much movement, so you got to really be creative with the fastball and cutter. I pitched well with him, though. But some people just don't do well with Paxton. You probably want to pass with him. Cliff Lee is like the Lance Lynn, per se, where he has the stuff and the control. I just don't know how to get the out pitch. But that knuckle curve is a little bit more viable than, say, that Lance Lynn slider. But that Cliff Lee is very solid. He wasn't too bad for me when I used him. Definitely a viable rotation option still. Fernando Valenzuela, if you pitched well with him before, will likely keep on pitching well with him. He's still very quirky. The attributes are starting to get a little low, but I think he's still good enough to get swing and misses. Live Series DeGrom is good until you get 99 DeGrom. But if you have the 99, definitely use him over the Live Series. But the Live Series one got a recent buff in the one roster update a few weeks back, so very good still. And I think guys like Glavine and Fergie Jenkins are very good options still. Some people don't pitch well with them though, but I know some people that live by that Fergie card. You'll likely like at least one of those two. In our A tier, I think solid options for your back couple rotation spots, but you likely want to make an upgrade to the S tier at some point. Guys like that Freddie Peralta, I mean, he's got attributes. I don't think the pitch mix plays the best. I don't think that sinker has much to it. It'd be tough to pitch against good players with him. Same with Vida Blue and Chrissy Mathewson. They have great attributes and a solid pitch mix, but it's like they were just missing one really effective pitch to making them very viable. Corbin Burns, however, I think is that really viable pitcher. And honestly, I'm still going to use this card, but I just think some people struggled with him. And also at this point in the game, people either saw Burns a lot or, you know, have really stacked squads. So Burns's attributes aren't going to be as good. I just feel like I have him separated from Valenzuela because I feel like Valenzuela's stuff is more frustrating. Burns is more of that contact out guy, but if people are making contact with good hitters, he likely won't be as successful. I think Gossman and Rodon are good team affinity options. Same with that Marquez. Viable TA3 options to throw in the back end of your rotation. Those guys are just lacking a little bit on the attributes in the pitch mix, especially guys like Rodon and Gossman. You can somewhat pitch effectively with them, I bet. Just like not going to be as good as those top bunch. And, you know, if you did your TA2 guys like Crochet and Priester, they'll be just as good as they were before, I would say. But again, they were never really top tier, I would say. You have your lower velo sinker cutter guys like Kluber, Hampton, Maddox, where they have the stuff to throw dots and hit spots. But again, if you're playing good hitters, you can hit all the spots you want. Their attributes aren't good enough and they aren't really quirky enough to really induce weak contact. And, you know, if you have Live Series Ohtani, if you want to use him until the 99 comes out, he is now a diamond. If his inside edge is playing well, if you have him paralleled, will be a very viable back end of the rotation option. Our starter budget options, most of them are, you know, good enough on the attributes, but a little weaker than those A tier guys on the pitch mix. Guys like Kikuchi and Rogers have 4 pitches and just, I don't know what their out pitch is going to be. It'd be very difficult to sequence properly with them. Players like Reinke, Oswalt, Verlander, Pedro have solid stuff and a solid pitch mix. I feel like the attributes aren't high enough, and I don't know if they're going to have enough deception to them. But, you know, you may somehow find a way to pitch well with them lower on those all-star ratings, veteran ratings, where you're playing people who may not be too great at the game. And, you know, if you're going to use any top snail cards, guys like Taijuan Walker, Julio Urias, who are a little higher overall, or Michael King, who have that sinker cutter. But again, you don't want to use them very long. Don't use the top snail cards that don't have that ideal pitch mix with that sinker cutter. At the very least, you probably want to completely avoid those cards. And guys like Frank Tanana, I just have him listed as an example. There are plenty of pitchers like him where they're breaking ball focused, multiple curveballs and only one fastball. You start playing solid players, they're going to hit them very hard. Especially at this point in the year, we already have very good teams. Tanana was maybe okay at the start, but at this point now, probably can't get away with putting him in your rotation. And those are the starters. I know there's a lot here. There's a lot of different players. Let's go to our final tier list here, our relievers. All right, so these are our relievers, and just like our starters, you see there are a lot of S tier players. There's a lot of players in that top tier, just because at this point in the game, we have a lot of higher attribute relievers that are pretty effective. There are some, however, that stayed good and are still solid, and some that kind of dropped the tier because, you know, teams are getting better, people are facing them more, and it's tough to pitch as effectively against good hitters with these guys. Going to our S tier, I think Mariano, Goose, Dibble, and Gregory Soto I mean, anyone in that bunch on the left half of S tier are like your God Squad relievers. I think that Goose has definitely a little bit more of a boost because of the outlier. Mariano has a 5 pitch mix and, you know, sinker, cutter, fastball, slider, changeup. So like a very good pitch mix for a reliever. You gotta really mix in the changeup and slider good enough though. Guys like Alex Reyes, Rob Dibble, and Lee Smith have some great velocity. They are very effective at this point in the game. Especially the Alex Reyes, he has the outlier on the sinker. Kind of like that Edward Cabrera. I just heard he doesn't have that much break on it. Gregory Soto and Zach Britton are kind of similar in the sense that they have the outlier sinker, except Soto has a changeup, which I think could be a big plus in comparison to that Britton. It's like that Britton is only missing 1 pitch, but it's still very effective because the outlier sinker. And then finally, guys like Familia, I think is still very good because of his outlier sinker. Liam Hendricks is a viable reliever option. He's not the most exciting pitcher on paper, but I think you could still pitch effectively with him, and plus him being a 96 makes him solid right now. Players that I don't think kept up with the S tier, guys. That 95 Goose just doesn't have outlier and enough control for me to warrant you putting him in your pen at this point. His stuff isn't good enough. Live Series Chapman, he's a gold now. Ignore the picture there. But he's still a very viable lefty. He's kind of like that Jake Diekman, except Chapman will likely be a little bit better. Devin Williams, Gold Dibble, Gold Lee Smith are likely going to be better options than some of the other players that you'll see in that A tier. Guys like Craig Kimbrell. I know it's crazy that a 97 overall reliever is in the A tier, but it's very difficult to pitch with a reliever that has 2 fastballs and a curveball. He's essentially a 2-pitch pitcher. And especially when one's a fastball, one's a curveball, especially when the fastball isn't hitting 100 consistently, it's going to be very difficult to pitch. I tried to use him once for a save. I swear I was going to have a heart attack. Quick to pick up relievers like Robertson, Darren O'Day, Adam Wainwright, who are very solid relievers, but more likely a back end of the bullpen guy, not guys who are you're gonna be using in high leverage situations. Our B tier guys, you have some guys you can earn through team affinity, through inning programs and those henchman packs. Raleigh Fingers is a very good budget option. I would honestly say he's the best of this B tier, but I just feel like this card doesn't have enough. His release isn't as quirky as it was in years past, so I have a more difficult time pitching effectively with him from what I use, but it's still very solid. Guys like Canely, Chad Green, Trevor May are okay for your starter bullpen, just not the biggest fan of their pitch mixes. Sean Doolittle, Josh Hader are like okay lefties. Same with Blake Snell. It's just like they don't have the most velocity or most break on their stuff. They're not going to be the most effective. And you have some of your other TA guys like Romo, Nathan, Heath Bell. You can get away with using your bullpen. The main guys I would avoid, guys like Ryan Presley. I mean, he's a little better than that Kimbrel in that sense that he has a different curveball. He's the sweeping curve, the slider, and then the fastball. But again, just like with the 3-pitch mix, I really think he's going to be easier to hit because of that pitch mix. And he's not even 97 like that Kimbrel. Bruce Sutter, he's got fastball, splitter, slider. I just feel like now I don't know how many outs you're going to get, especially with his lack of velocity. John Smoltz is like that Bruce Sutter. Honestly, I could have put this Craig Kimbrel in the B tier. I feel like you can get away with using him, but again, just like a little bit of a breaking ball focused guy. Henke and Jansen don't have many pitches, and yes, Henke has the forkball and Jansen has the cutter, but even still, it's like they're kind of easy to hit at this point, but they're kind of like an in-between of B and F. If you're not playing the game much though, you know, you can kind of get away with using whatever B or F tier guys, but you don't want to use them too much. And finally, to end it all off, this is what my virtual God squad would look like if I were to take the best players at each position, put them on one team. This is if I were to build them on a team. This isn't me just only getting the best players in the game out there. I want the combination of, say, S tier players and the best of the best. But also, this is about balancing a lineup and building a team in a balanced manner where you can succeed the most at any level of ranked. And as you see, you look at our infield options. I got Vlad at first over Poppy. I got Chipper at third, Wander and Soriano at second. You could likely flip-flop Jackie Robinson for Soriano if you don't like That's Soriano, or you can even throw Trey Turner at second and throw someone else in the outfield. I think Acuna is the go-to option at right field with his gold defense and great all-around hitting attributes. His swing plays really well too. Mike Trout is great as an outfielder, especially if you've been using him for a while. The inside edge boosts he gets will basically have him at a 99 many times if you don't have him paralleled much. And you know, the gold defense, he'll have basically all in 3 positions with gold if you get his parallels up. And he's a very good corner outfield option. Despite his animations not being the best, his swing plays really well. And Trey Turner, I think, is a must-use card based on the speed and the really good contact and honestly insane swing he has. So I have him at center field on this team, but again, you could shuffle this. If you don't have Wander, you could try Turner at short, put someone else in the outfield, and you could really just like flip-flop 1 or 2 players based on what you have or based on who you actually do really good with. And on the bench, you see, I like to get a mix of bats. For me, when I'm choosing a team, I like to have a backup catcher, especially in the Schwarber situation. He can be platooned. With Salvi, I want to have that option, but it's not a necessity. I like to just have the backup catcher in case the late game scenario comes down and I need someone to pinch run, like that Jackie. I could just put anyone, I could replace anyone with Jackie, pinch run him, so I don't have to worry about anything being out of loop. And Jackie plays virtually anywhere. He plays first, second, third, and left field. So that covers a lot of positions. And usually at that point, I don't have all my pinch hitters burned. So, you know, I could move someone to short like Trey Turner to his secondary. And I like to have 2 bench bats versus righties and potentially 2 bench bats versus lefties. So I could use Salvi as a pinch hitter versus lefties with the 125-125. Castellanos versus lefties as well. And David Ortiz versus righties. And a guy like Jared Walsh versus righties as well. But he's basically only used versus righties. If you don't like having that many split heavy guys, you could put guys like Eduardo Escobar, who are switch hitters, good versus both sides. Look for that kind of thing on your bench. And for the rotation and all that, here it is. These are all the pitchers I pitched the best with. Yes, I still have Corbin Burnes in there. I had him as an A-tier pitcher. I have had no issues with pitching with him. For some reason, I just feel really comfortable with him on the mound. He's up to a 96 overall with the parallels, so that's definitely a big plus. But if I were to replace him with anyone, I would replace him with that James Paxton. I pitched the best with that card. For some reason, I managed to pitch effectively with him, but you know, other people may want to consider other options like Cliff Lee, top tier option like Glavine you enjoy, whichever one you can find works the best for you. And then my bullpen, this is really what I would stick with. Guys like your Marianos, Gregory Sotos, Rob Dibbles are guys I would go to in high leverage situations. Obviously, I don't have 99 Goose. 99 Goose would be in there over Dennis Eckersley, I would think. Either over him or Lee Smith. I like rocking 3 lefty relievers, by the way. I think 3 is enough. I don't think you need to do 4 and 4. I haven't had the situation where I've had to worry about matchups that much where I've burned all my relievers like that. And that is it. I know this is a longer video. This is some useful help for you guys. These are, again, at the end of the day, my opinions. So if you disagree, if you want to have a debate about this, feel free to hop down in the comment section. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. This is based on my use, what I've heard from people, just overall things that I have interacted with these players. And hopefully this was a more streamlined version of the tier list in the first go, where we made 3 videos and talked about it for like an hour and a half on the channel. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure you like if you enjoyed. I'd like to do this about once a month. And I hope you guys enjoyed, man. You all have a great rest of your day. I'll see you all next one. Deuces.